All right, let's dive deep into Harvard Business Review, the essential guide to leadership. You've already got the book, so you're clearly on the right track. But we're going to pull out those actionable insights and see how they apply to you.
It's a great resource, tons of practical wisdom.
Oh, absolutely. Let's kick things off with total leadership. It kind of throws that whole work-life balance thing out the window and says, hey, we can actually have it all. Wins in our careers, at home, in our communities, and even for ourselves.
So many people struggle with that, right? Feeling pulled in every direction and like they're constantly sacrificing one area for another.
Right, exactly.
Total leadership gives us a much better alternative.
Okay, so it's not about magically finding more hours in the day, right? What's the secret?
It's all about integration, not balance. The book uses this term four-way wins, recognizing that these different parts of our lives aren't separate at all. They can actually support each other.
So it's about finding those sweet spots where your work enhances your personal life and vice versa.
You got it. The book even has a great example of this in action. There's this manager, Kenneth Chen, ambitious guy, wanted to be CEO, but also felt this pull toward community involvement and family.
I think we can all relate to that. So many goals and not enough time.
Right. But Kenneth didn't see them as competing goals. He used total leadership to design a win-win. So he joined a community board with his fiancée, and it hit all three goals at once.
That's great. He's building skills for his CEO aspirations, contributing to his community, and strengthening his family, all at the same time.
Exactly. And it's not just a nice story. There's research showing people who use total leadership principles see more satisfaction in all areas of their lives.
Wow, so it really works.
It does. And get this, they even perform better at work while working fewer hours.
Wait, hold on. Better results in less time. I'm listening.
Yeah, it's powerful, right? And it's not just a concept. The book lays out a 4-step process to make total leadership actually happen.
Okay, walk me through it.
Step 1 is reflection. Really taking a look at where you stand in each area: work, home, community, and self. It's asking, am I spending my time and energy in line with what matters to me?
Kind of like a personal inventory, but for every part of your life.
Exactly. Step 2 is where it gets fun. Experimentation. You design small, time-bound changes, like little experiments, to see what sticks.
Oh, I love that idea. The book had some interesting examples like working from the library to cut down on commuting, or training for a half marathon with your kids to raise money for a charity your company supports.
It's about finding those creative ways to bring different parts of your life together.
Got it. So we've reflected, experimented. What's next?
Step 3 is choosing. From those experiments, pick the 2 or 3 that worked best, ones that had the biggest impact, taught you the most, and aligned with your values.
So being strategic and focusing on what works for you.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to pick experiments that push you a bit. That's where the good stuff happens.
Makes sense. And step 4.
Measuring. It's about accountability. Creating a system to track progress, even for those less tangible goals like well-being or family. The book uses Kenneth Chen as an example here too. He created a scorecard to track his progress with clear goals.
Wow, so even something like community connection can be measured.
Absolutely. It's about defining what success means to you and then tracking your progress. That's how you make things really happen.
It's a very practical and empowering idea. It reminds us that we have more control over our lives than we think.
For sure. And speaking of control, that leads us into managing oneself.
So taking those total leadership skills and using them for professional growth.
Yes. The idea is that companies don't hand us career paths anymore. We have to create our own and take ownership.
So we're all CEOs of our own careers now.
Right. And just like a CEO, we got to be strategic, proactive, and always looking to grow.
Sounds a bit daunting, honestly. Where do we even start?
The book uses Peter Drucker's 5 questions for managing oneself, like a roadmap for our careers.
Okay, I'm ready to map my route. Give me the first question.
Question 1 is, what are my strengths? Focus on what you're good at, not on fixing all your weaknesses.
I like that. Work on your strengths until they become superpowers, right?
Exactly. Drucker talked about feedback analysis, where you pay attention to the outcomes of your actions. What are you consistently good at? What energizes you?
So become a scientist of your own success.
I like that. Question 2 is, how do I perform? Understanding your work style and preferences.
Okay, what does that mean, how I perform?
It's about things like, how do you learn best? Do you like working with others or alone? Thrive under pressure or need more predictability?
Never thought about it like that. But it seems important for being effective.
It is. The book gives examples of leaders like Dwight Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson, how their work style affected their successes and failures. We can come back to that, but let's move to question 3. What are my values?
Okay, that one seems pretty basic, right? Knowing your ethical compass.
Ethics are important, but it's more than that. It's understanding what drives your actions in work and life, and finding an organization whose values match your own.
Because if your values clash with your work, that can create some inner turmoil.
You got it. It just won't work long term. Now, question 4. Where do I belong?
That's a big one. Figuring out your place in the world.
It's about putting it all together. Knowing your strengths, work style, and values helps you identify the right roles and organizations for you, and learn to say no to the wrong ones.
So being intentional with your career, not settling for something that doesn't feel right.
Exactly. And finally, question 5. What should my contribution be?
This feels huge, like defining your legacy.
It's about going beyond just doing your job. It's thinking bigger. How can you use your strengths to make a real difference?
Finding that place where your skills, passions, and the world's needs meet.
Right. The book is an example of a hospital administrator who focused on improving the ER. He set this goal. Every patient had to be seen by a nurse within 60 seconds.
Wow, ambitious.
And within a year, his ER was a model for other hospitals. Small, focused actions can create massive change.
Inspiring. It makes you think about where you can make a difference.
That's managing oneself, taking responsibility for your development, seeking challenges, making a contribution. It starts with those 5 questions. But there's one more piece, especially for the long term, the second half of your life.
That's an interesting phrase. Isn't it just, you work, then you retire?
Not anymore. Drucker argued that knowledge work extends our careers. We need to plan for that second half, finding new challenges to keep us engaged.
So saying goodbye to the old work then retire model and embracing a multi-stage career.
Exactly. Drucker outlines 3 paths. One is starting a completely new career, like switching organizations or fields entirely, maybe a business executive becoming a teacher, or a lawyer opening a bakery.
That's a big change.
Yeah.
But I can see it if you're feeling that pull to do something different.
Right. Our passions can change over time. It's never too late to reinvent yourself. Then there's path 2, a parallel career. You keep your main job, but also dedicate time to a second role, often in nonprofits, for fulfillment and community.
So you can be a marketing executive by day and volunteer at an animal shelter on weekends.
Yes. The best of both worlds. Stability and experience from your first career, plus passion from a second. And path 3 is becoming a social entrepreneur. Using your first career success to start a nonprofit or social venture while you're still working.
So taking your business skills and making a positive impact.
Exactly. All 3 paths encourage us to stay engaged, keep learning, and contribute long after retirement age.
This multi-stage career idea is great. It fits with how we grow as people. But thinking about all this long-term planning and juggling can feel a bit overwhelming.
It's a lot, but remember, it's about managing yourself, not perfectly controlling everything. And there's a concept in the book that helps us navigate this complexity, integrative thinking.
Okay, that got my attention. Tell me more about integrative thinking. Does it involve yoga?
Not quite, though yoga's great. Integrative thinking is a mental model, approaching problems in a new way. Remember that feeling of being stuck between 2 options, both with downsides?
Ugh, yeah, all the time, at work and in life.
Integrative thinking helps. It's about resisting that either choice and finding a both-hand solution, holding those opposite ideas and using them to create a better third option.
Okay, my brain's doing a little dance trying to picture that. But I'm intrigued. Example.
Sure. The book talks about Bob Young, co-founder of Red Hat. He faced this dilemma in software. Stick with the traditional model of charging high prices for exclusive software, or go with the emerging open source model, giving it away for free.
Classic exclusivity versus accessibility. Tough choice.
Most people would feel they had to choose. But Bob Young didn't. He saw the value in both and combined them.
How did he do that?
He made a hybrid model. He gave away Red Hat's software for free, like open source BUT. He charged for services, upgrades, and support.
Clever. He got the open source community A&D revenue from businesses that needed that extra support.
Exactly. It was a win-win. He attracted both individual users and cautious companies. Freedom and security. That's integrative thinking. It's about going beyond the obvious, questioning assumptions, finding solutions others miss.
This could be a game changer, not just in tech, but for any problem. Approaching things with an open mind, willing to try unconventional solutions.
Absolutely. Integrative thinking is crucial for navigating this interconnected, ambiguous world, embracing complexity and finding ways to blend those seemingly opposite ideas.
My mind is definitely stretching in a good way. It's exciting to think about applying this kind of thinking. But another challenge I've been facing is managing teams with people from all sorts of backgrounds. Sometimes it's like we're speaking different languages, even when we're all speaking English.
You're talking about leading multicultural teams. That's
Yeah.
more relevant than ever in today's global workplace.
Totally. Working with people from diverse cultures is so rewarding. But there are also those moments of miscommunication and misunderstanding. What I intend as constructive feedback can come across as harsh, and I don't even realize it until much later.
You've hit on a core challenge. Managing multicultural teams isn't just about being tolerant or respectful on the surface. It's about understanding those cultural norms and values that shape how people communicate, make decisions, and deal with conflict.
Right, going beyond the surface differences and recognizing how deeply culture affects our interactions.
Exactly. To navigate those differences effectively, it helps to understand the potential barriers. The book identifies 4 common ones.
Okay, let's hear about those pitfalls.
Barrier number 1 is direct versus indirect communication. Cultures vary in how directly they address problems or disagree. Some value directness, others prefer subtlety. Those differences can lead to misunderstandings.
I've seen that, for sure. What's intended as helpful feedback can come across as blunt, if it's not culturally sensitive. And then on the flip side, indirect communication can be misinterpreted as being evasive.
It's a delicate balance. The book gives an example of an American manager working with Japanese colleagues. She tried to give feedback directly, and it didn't go well.
No, what happened?
Her Japanese colleagues were really offended. In their culture, directly pointing out flaws, especially in a group, is considered very rude. Her intentions were good, but her style clashed with their norms, and it damaged relationships.
It's a good reminder that polite and professional mean different things in different cultures. We all have our own cultural baggage, and we need to be mindful of how our communication might be perceived.
Well said. And that leads to barrier number 2, trouble with accents and fluency.
This one seems more straightforward, right? Literally understanding each other when people have different accents or levels of fluency?
It can seem obvious, but it can lead to frustration if it's not addressed, especially when people have to constantly repeat themselves or slow down their speech.
It can make people feel self-conscious or like they're not being taken seriously.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding the words. Accents and fluency can affect how people are perceived, whether fairly or not.
Unfortunately, people do judge intelligence or competence based on accents.
And those judgments can create barriers to collaboration and trust. It reminds us that we all have biases, and we need to be mindful of how those biases might be impacting our interactions. Now, barrier number 3, differing attitudes toward hierarchy and authority.
I can see how cultural norms around respect for authority could impact how teams work, especially decision-making and conflict resolution.
Definitely. Some cultures have very strict hierarchies and protocols for interacting with those in authority. Others are much more egalitarian, where it's fine to question or challenge your boss.
And those differences can cause friction if they're not understood. Yeah. The book talked about a Korean-U.S. negotiation that almost failed because the Americans didn't understand Korean norms around hierarchy.
Yeah, they went over their Korean counterparts' heads and talked directly to higher-ups. It caused offense and mistrust because it violated their sense of respect for authority. So it's important to be aware of the chain of command and approach things in a culturally sensitive way.
Makes sense. And the 4th barrier.
Conflicting norms for decision-making cultures value different things, like speed versus thoroughness, consensus versus individual decision-making. Those differences can lead to frustration and inefficiency.
Oh, this one hits home for me. I'm very decisive, gather info, weigh options, make a call, and move on. But I've learned not everyone works that way.
Right. The book has this example of a U.S. Spanish team and their Korean counterparts. The U.S. Spanish team, valuing efficiency, were frustrated by the Koreans' tendency to revisit things they'd already agreed on.
But the Korean team, valuing consensus, wanted to make sure everyone was fully on board before moving forward.
It's a classic example of how cultural norms around decision-making can clash, even with good intentions. So we've talked about these potential barriers. What can managers do to help multicultural teams succeed?
Now you're talking. Give me some actionable advice.
The book outlines 3 types of interventions. First is adaptation.
Adapting to the other cultures, not making everyone adapt to yours.
Right. It's about learning to adjust to and respect another culture's way of doing things, recognizing that there's no one right way to communicate or make decisions.
I love that idea. Learning and growing from each other's cultural perspectives, becoming more flexible leaders.
Exactly. The second intervention is structural intervention.
So rearranging the office furniture.
Huh. Not exactly, though sometimes that helps. Structural intervention is about intentionally reorganizing teams or workflows to minimize friction, proactively addressing potential conflicts before they blow up.
Setting the team up for success from a structural perspective. Can you give an example?
Sure. The book talks about an investment research team with members from continental Europe, the UK, and the US. They were clashing over status and language, which was hurting their performance.
Sounds tough. What did their manager do?
He took action. He hired a consultant to facilitate their meetings, which made a more neutral and structured environment. It helped everyone contribute more effectively.
That's smart. Sometimes a neutral third party can make a big difference. It creates a safe space where everyone feels heard.
Absolutely. And the third intervention is managerial intervention, where the manager directly resolves conflicts or sets ground rules. But this should be a last resort.
Why? Shouldn't the manager be the one to take charge?
It's tempting to think so, but doing it too much can backfire. It can create dependency and undermine the team's ability to solve their own problems. It's about finding that balance, guiding and fostering independence.
Empowering the team to find their own solutions whenever possible.
That's
That
awesome.
builds trust and a sense of ownership.
Exactly. All three interventions, adaptation, structural, and managerial, highlight the importance of being culturally sensitive. Understanding the unique challenges that multicultural teams face, it's not about making everyone conform to a single culture. It's about making everyone feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work.
This has been so insightful. I'm already thinking about how to apply this to my teams and create a more inclusive environment. But wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part. Total leadership, managing oneself, integrative thinking, and leading multicultural teams.
It's a lot to digest, but remember, these aren't just abstract ideas. They're practical tools you can use in your own life and work today.
That's what I love about this, making these powerful ideas actionable. And I can't wait to continue in part 2, where we'll go even deeper into these concepts and uncover even more insights from the book.
We'll be looking at more specific examples of how these principles work in the real world, and we'll offer some practical tips you can use right away.
Stay tuned, everyone. Our leadership journey continues.
Welcome back to our deep dive. It's great to continue this with you. In part 1, we really dug into total leadership and managing oneself from the Harvard Business Review, The Essential Guide to Leadership.
Those concepts were eye-opening. It's easy to get caught up in that feeling of juggling different parts of your life, like you're always sacrificing something. But total leadership gives us this inspiring alternative, finding those win-win situations where your work life, personal life, community involvement, and even your own personal growth can all work together.
It's about recognizing the connections and making them work for you. And managing oneself takes it further, applying it to our careers, being proactive, taking charge of our development, and asking those tough questions like, what am I good at? How do I perform best? What are my values? Where do I belong? And what should my contribution be?
Those questions really make you think about your career in a different way. Not just about climbing the ladder, but figuring out what you want and how to get there.
Exactly. Taking ownership, not just letting things happen. And now we're going to dive into 2 more game-changing ideas from the book: integrative thinking and managing multicultural teams.
Okay, I'm ready to level up even more. Let's start with integrative thinking. It sounds a bit mysterious and philosophical. Does it involve meditating on a mountaintop?
Maybe. But really, integrative thinking is about training your mind to approach problems in a new way. You know that feeling of being stuck between 2 options, both with downsides?
Oh yeah, all the time. At work. In my personal life, it never ends.
Right, well, integrative thinking helps us escape those mental traps. It's about resisting that either mindset and looking for a both-hand solution. You hold 2 opposing ideas and use that tension to create a better third option.
My brain is doing somersaults trying to picture that. But I'm interested. Got an example?
Of course. The book uses this example from the tech world. Bob Young, co-founder of Red Hat, faced a classic dilemma. Should he stick with the expensive proprietary software model or embrace the open source model and give it away for free?
Talk about a tough choice. Exclusivity versus accessibility. A real head-scratcher.
Most people would have felt forced to choose one, but Bob Young, he saw the value in both and found a way to combine them.
Okay, I'm hooked. How did you do that?
He created a hybrid model, gave away Red Hat software for free, like open source. But here's a key. He charged for things like upgrades and support. He was able to tap into the open source community while also making money from businesses that needed that extra support.
Wow, that's smart. He basically created a whole new category by refusing to play by the old rules, taking the best of both worlds.
Exactly. That's the core of integrative thinking. Challenging assumptions, thinking outside the box, finding solutions others miss. It's about embracing the complexity and finding those win-win solutions.
It's a whole new way of approaching problems. And, it makes me think about another challenge that's been on my mind. Leading teams with people from so many different backgrounds. It's incredible, but also, honestly, I've made some mistakes. What might seem polite or professional to me can be totally different in another culture.
Ah, yes, the complexities of leading multicultural teams are one of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of leadership today.
For sure. And the book talks about this so well, highlighting the potential pitfalls and offering strategies to navigate those cultural differences. One thing that struck me was direct versus indirect communication. I struggled with that, especially when giving feedback or dealing with conflict. What might seem like an honest conversation to me can come across as really harsh to someone from a culture that's more indirect.
It's a key challenge. Those differences in communication style can cause friction if we're not careful. The book gives an example of an American manager in Japan who learned this the hard way. She tried to give feedback directly, and it backfired.
Oh no, what happened?
Her Japanese colleagues were very offended. Directly pointing out flaws, especially in a group, is considered very rude in their culture. Her intentions were good, but her style went against their norms, and it really damaged relationships.
It shows how important it is to be culturally sensitive. Not just being nice, but understanding those nuances of communication. What's considered professional varies so much.
Well said. That leads us to the second barrier. Accents and fluency.
This one seems more straightforward, but just being able to understand each other when people have different accents or levels of fluency.
It might seem simple, but it can cause a lot of frustration if we don't address it. Think about constantly having to repeat yourself or slow down.
Right, it can make people feel self-conscious and like they're not being taken seriously.
And it's not just about understanding the words. Accents and fluency affect how we perceive people, whether we realize it or not.
Sadly, people do judge intelligence or competence based on accents.
And those judgments can make it hard to collaborate and build trust. It reminds us that we all have biases, and we have to be aware of how those biases might be affecting our interactions. Moving on to barrier number 3. Differing attitudes towards hierarchy and authority.
This one is interesting. How respect for authority plays out in different cultures can really affect how teams work, especially with decision-making and conflict.
Absolutely. Some cultures have a very clear hierarchy, and it's seen as disrespectful to question someone in authority. Other cultures are much more egalitarian, where speaking up and challenging your boss is encouraged.
And if those differences aren't understood, it can lead to problems. The book gave that example of a Korean-U.S. negotiation that almost fell apart because the Americans didn't understand Korean norms around hierarchy.
They went around their Korean counterparts and talked directly to the higher-ups, which was a big mistake. It caused offense because it went against their respect for authority. So being aware of the chain of command and being culturally sensitive is so important.
Makes sense. What's the fourth barrier?
It's about different decision-making styles. Some cultures value speed and efficiency, while others prefer a more collaborative and consensus-based approach. Those differences can create a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I know this one well. I like to make decisions quickly, gather information, weigh the options, and move on. But not everyone works like that, and it's taken me a while to learn that.
The book gives an example of a U.S. Spanish team working with their Korean counterparts. The U.S. Spanish team, valuing efficiency, got frustrated with the Koreans who wanted to revisit points they had already discussed.
And the Koreans, valuing consensus, just wanted to make sure everyone was truly in agreement, not trying to be difficult, just thorough.
It shows how different cultural norms can clash, even when everyone's trying their best. So we've talked about the barriers. What can managers actually do to help multicultural teams succeed?
I'm all ears. Practical strategies, please.
The book suggests 3 types of interventions. First is adaptation.
So adapting to the other cultures on the team, not making everyone conform to one dominant culture.
You got it. Learning to adjust and respect the way other cultures do things, recognizing that there isn't just one right way.
I like that. Learning and growing from those differences, becoming more flexible and adaptable leaders.
Exactly. The second intervention is structural intervention.
Does that involve rearranging the office furniture?
Maybe sometimes. But structural intervention is about intentionally changing how the team is organized or how work flows to reduce friction. It's about getting ahead of those potential conflicts.
So setting up the team for success from a structural perspective. Got an example?
Of course. There's this story about an investment research team struggling with status differences and language barriers. They had people from all over, continental Europe, the UK, the US. They just couldn't get on the same page.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah.
How did their manager fix it?
He was proactive. He hired a consultant to facilitate their meetings. This created a neutral, structured space, and it really helped. It leveled the playing field, cleared up misunderstandings, and everyone could contribute better.
Bringing in a neutral outsider can make such a difference. It gives everyone that safe space to be heard.
Absolutely. The third intervention is managerial intervention. The manager stepping in to resolve conflicts or set rules, but this is a last resort.
Why is that? Shouldn't the manager take charge and handle those conflicts?
It can seem that way, but doing it too much can make the team dependent. It's about finding the balance, providing guidance, but also letting them figure things out themselves.
So it's about fostering ownership and accountability.
Yeah.
That builds trust and respect between the manager and the team.
Exactly. And all three interventions, adaptation, structural, and managerial, emphasize the importance of being culturally sensitive. It's not about making everyone conform to a single culture. It's about valuing everyone's unique perspectives and creating an environment where everyone can thrive.
His has been so helpful. I'm already thinking of ways to apply this to my teams and create a more inclusive environment. But wow, we've covered so much of these first two parts, from total leadership and managing oneself to integrative thinking and leading multicultural teams.
We have, but remember, these are tools you can start using right now. And in part 3, we'll dive into even more real-world examples and practical tips from the book.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's time for even more wisdom from Harvard Business Review, the essential guide to leadership. We've explored some really powerful ideas in parts 1 and 2, like total leadership, managing oneself, integrative thinking, and leading those multicultural teams.
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure. But it's all about putting those ideas into practice, seeing them in action in the real world.
Exactly. So I'm really looking forward to some more concrete examples of these leadership principles. Let's go back to total leadership for a minute. I keep thinking about those four-way wins, across work, home, community, and self.
Remember Kenneth Chen, that manager who wanted to be CEO but also wanted a strong family and community connections?
Oh, yeah. He joined that community board with his fiancée. That was brilliant. It helped him build leadership skills, give back to his community, and strengthen his relationship all at once.
And it wasn't just a one-time thing. He kept using that approach, always finding ways to connect his professional goals with his personal values and commitments.
I love that. It shows that total leadership isn't just some theory. It's a way to create a more fulfilling life, both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And speaking of creating our lives, let's revisit managing oneself for a sec. Remember Peter Drucker's 5 essential questions? Those can really change the game when it comes to taking charge of our careers and figuring out what we really want.
They really make you think differently about your career. It's not just about promotions. It's about knowing your strengths, your values, and where you can contribute the most.
And understanding how you work best, that's crucial. The book tells a story about Dwight Eisenhower, the World War II general and later president. He was known for being a really clear communicator, explaining complex things in just a few words.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this before. He was so decisive, cut through the noise, got to the point. How did he develop that skill?
Turns out he was a reader, not a listener. His aides knew that, so they always gave him information in writing, detailed reports and memos before any meetings or press conferences. That gave him time to process and think through his responses.
That's fascinating. So it wasn't that he couldn't listen. He just absorbed information best through reading, and his team adapted to that.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of a leader knowing his strengths and working with his team to create the best environment for him. But here's the interesting part. When Eisenhower became president, he tried to do those press conferences where reporters shout out questions like his predecessors, who were great listeners.
Well, I bet that didn't go well.
It was a disaster.
Yeah.
He'd ramble, go off topic, never actually answer the questions. That environment just didn't work for him.
Because he was trying to operate outside of his natural style. It shows how important self-awareness is for leadership. Knowing how we learn, how we work best, and communicating that to our teams.
Absolutely. And once you know your strengths, you can use them to make a real difference. Remember that example of the hospital administrator who focused on improving the emergency room?
Yeah. He wanted every patient seen by a nurse within 60 seconds. And his ER became a model for others. Focusing on an area where you can really contribute can have a huge impact.
It all started with him knowing himself and finding where his skills and passions could really make a difference. Now let's switch gears back to integrative thinking. It can be a bit of a mind bender, but once it clicks, it can totally change how you approach problems.
I'm still working on getting it. It's about holding those opposite ideas and using that tension to create a better solution, right?
Exactly. Resisting those either choices and finding that both hand. Seeing the value in those contradictory viewpoints and combining them into something new and innovative.
Like that story about Bob Young in the software industry. The classic dilemma. High-priced proprietary software or free open source? Most people would feel like they had to choose one.
But he didn't. He saw value in both and made a hybrid model, gave away the software, but charged for extra services and support. A really smart solution.
It's like he reinvented the game, took the best of both worlds, and made something truly unique.
That's the power of integrative thinking. It's about challenging those assumptions, thinking differently, finding those creative solutions. Okay, let's jump back into leading those multicultural teams. We talked about those 4 barriers. But how can managers actually get past those barriers and create a more inclusive and collaborative environment?
Hit me with those strategies.
The book has 3 types of interventions.
Okay.
First is adaptation.
So we adapt to the other cultures, not make everyone adapt to ours.
Right. Learning to adjust to and respect how other cultures do things. There's no one right way.
I'm all about that. Embracing those differences, seeing them as opportunities to learn and grow, becoming more flexible as leaders.
Yes. It's about expanding our perspectives and becoming more adaptable. The second intervention is structural intervention.
So this is where we rearrange the office.
Maybe sometimes. Structural intervention is about making changes to the team's structure or their workflow to minimize friction. Thinking ahead and tackling those potential conflicts before they become big problems.
Proactive. I like it. Can you give me an example?
The book talks about this investment research team that was struggling with communication. They had people from Europe, the UK, and the US, and they were constantly clashing.
That sounds rough. What did their manager do?
He was proactive. He brought in a consultant to facilitate their meetings. It created this more neutral and structured environment, and it worked. Everyone felt more comfortable, there were fewer misunderstandings, and the team was much more effective.
Bringing in an objective outsider can be so helpful. It creates that safe space where everyone can be heard.
Absolutely. And lastly, there's managerial intervention, where the manager directly steps in to resolve conflicts or set some ground rules, but this is a last resort.
Why is that? Shouldn't the manager just take care of those conflicts?
It's tempting to think that, but if you do it too often, the team becomes dependent on you. It's about finding the right balance, providing guidance, but also giving them the space to figure things out on their own.
So it's about promoting ownership and accountability within the team. I bet that also builds trust and respect.
You got it. And all these interventions, adaptations, structural and managerial, really stress the importance of understanding and respecting those cultural differences. It's not about making everyone conform, it's about making sure everyone feels valued and respected so they can do their best work.
This whole deep dive into the essential guide to leadership has been amazing. We've explored some truly powerful ideas. Total leadership, managing oneself, integrative thinking, and those strategies for leading multicultural teams.
And we've seen how they can be used in real-life situations to achieve amazing things.
It's been a great reminder that leadership isn't about titles. It's about making conscious choices and striving to make a positive impact. No matter where you are in your life or career, there's always something here for you. So keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading. Until next time on The Deep Dive.